We're in Greece, about 2,600 years ago. The wind moved over fields of violets, mixing their scent with the smell of cypress trees. Music filled the air. Orpheus was in the countryside playing his lyre, charming wild beasts with his music, coaxing the cypress and pomegranate trees to sway, charming the rocks to dance. His music was irresistible. Some distance away, his wife Eurydice was walking in a meadow and came upon a shepherd tending a small herd of cattle. The shepherd, instantly smitten by Eurydice, began chasing her. As she ran, Eurydice was bitten by a snake and died, descending to the depths of the underworld, the lower zone ruled by the god Hades. Orpheus despaired at the death of his beloved Eurydice and resolved to go to the underworld to seek her return. So Orpheus descended to the river Acheron, where he met and charmed the ferryman Charon to take him across. Leaving the boat, Orpheus immediately encountered Cerberus, the three-headed dog guarding the far shore to ensure the living could not enter and the dead could not leave. Orpheus played his lyre and sang, and lulled Cerberus to sleep. Finally, Orpheus found Hades, the lord of the underworld, sitting with his wife Persephone. Orpheus's enchanting music softened their hearts so much that they agreed to let Orpheus leave with Eurydice on one condition. The condition was that Eurydice should follow behind him, and that Orpheus must not look back at her as they ascended back to the upper world. Orpheus and Eurydice slowly rose, higher and higher, climbing a steep slope in near darkness. After a while, the first light of day became visible. Orpheus had been growing anxious, to the point that he could not resist looking to see if his beloved Eurydice was still following. They were almost there. Orpheus looked back. In one brief moment he saw her, and she saw his face. They tried to embrace. Then she vanished forever. Despondent at his loss, Orpheus swore off the love of women, seeking only boys. This enraged the Dionysian women so much that one night at a wild bacchanalian orgy, they tore him to pieces. His head floated down the Hebrus River, still singing, into the Mediterranean, and came to rest at the island of Lesbos. Orpheus's lyre was placed among the stars. The word myth is descended from the ancient Greek word mythos, which meant something like speech or thought or story. A myth, like the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, is a speech-thought story. It's hard not to feel some emotional impact when we hear this speech-thought story. We feel Orpheus's loss of his lover Eurydice. We feel Eurydice's anguish when she sees the light of day, only to be betrayed by Orpheus's look. We sense there's a hidden story about music, magic. We're almost willing to believe that music could actually enchant trees and animals. We sense there's a story about going down and coming back up, and the meaning of love. When we recall the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, we may feel that some complex and mysterious story tried to reveal itself, except it didn't quite reveal itself. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and have not charity, I am become as sounding brass, or a tinkling cymbal. And if I have prophecy, and know all mysteries, and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. When I was a child, I spake as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as also I am known. 3,000 years ago, before the alphabet, before printing, before books, before science, speech was our way of communicating. Poetry was our way of remembering. And myth was our way of thinking. We made speech-thought stories. Now, as the passage from 1 Corinthians suggests, we see speech-thought stories through a glass darkly. Every night we enter the underworld. We dream. When we wake from a dream, we're like Eurydice escaping the underworld. We move gradually up to consciousness, and when we look back at our dream to remember it, to see it in the light of day, we lose something in it forever. But not all of us. Not the poets, the musicians, the artists. They speak the language of riddles, associations, feelings, dreams. These people have been born in or entered or become permanent residents of the underworld, the mythic side. The poem is a little myth of man's capacity of making life meaningful. And in the end, the poem is not a thing we see. It is rather a light by which we may see, and what we see is life. The logic of myths, of symbols, of dreams, is very different from the logic of reason. Speech-thought stories, myths, symbols, have a very real and very peculiar logic of their own. Let's look at some of the strangely familiar rules that myths and symbols play by. A little story, like the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, takes a long time to unfold. Its elements, its symbols of music, lust, love, water, hell, descent, darkness, unfold into large stories about time, the unconscious, about love, about bringing things to light and not bringing things to light. Symbols condense many meanings into a single image. When we see how a picture is worth 1,000 words, we gain insight into the vast and eternal sea of meaning we swim in every day. In the dream world, time doesn't exist. All of us have had a long dream that took only seconds in real time. When we enter the underworld, time gives way to sequence. So, myths aren't stories that took place long ago. They're sequences that are happening now. Right now, some Orpheus somewhere is descending into some underworld, looking for his Eurydice. Right now, some Eurydice is being betrayed by her lover's look. When we absorb the meanings of the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, we'll see them play out right now in our own lives. To enter the underworld, Orpheus played music to charm the three-headed guard dog Cerberus. The three heads represent the past, the present, and the time yet to come. When Orpheus lulled Cerberus to sleep, he put time to sleep, exactly what we do every night to enter our own underworld of dreams. To see a world in a grain of sand, and a heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour. In myths and poetry, small things point to big things, and big things point to small things. In T.S. Eliot's Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, the opening line describes the evening spread out against the sky like a patient etherized on a table, the large image of a feeling held in the small breast of one man. In a dream, a black door can represent the world of wounds and hurts we carry within. A yellow flower, the hope for the rebirth of happiness. Understanding a myth like that of Orpheus and Eurydice can't be done logically. From a rational perspective, the story of a musician attempting to recover his dead wife is absurd, even pathological. But when we begin to associate the symbols of the myth with our own lives, a meaningful story unfolds. What is the music of love for us? When do we personally descend into darkness? How could we hope for someone to lead us out? What is the failure of love? These questions have answers if we let the symbols move freely in our unconscious. For centuries, the Western world had been immersed in logical thought, scientific theorizing, and rigorous classification systems. Then, in 1900, an ancient symbolic process was rediscovered by Sigmund Freud. He called it free association. In his book, The Emerald Tablet, the occult master Hermes Trismegistus coined the phrase, "as above, so below." The microcosm reflects the macrocosm. Myths and symbols reveal the interplay between our psyches and the universe itself. Jungian psychoanalysts use dreams and symbols to read the structure of a person's unconscious. Tarot card readers use symbols to interpret the interplay between a particular psyche and the universe it inhabits. Poets use symbols to reflect universal truths hidden in the mysterious relationship between words and reality. Painters splash colors of feeling, and dancers move to the music of Orpheus's lyre, feeling the rhythm that even rocks and trees want to express. The myth of Orpheus and Eurydice involved music and the underworld. These two themes appear in many of the world's myths, including the creation myth of the Australian Aborigines. Most of us in the West have no direct connection to our mythical past, except through dreams, therapy, or art. But when we hear a mythic story told, some part of us is moved. Here's a story from a people who to this day still enter the dream time of their mythic past. In ancient tribal times, dreams used to be shared as part of everyday life. There was a connection between waking life and dream life. Dreams would invest daily objects with magical meaning, and a part of waking life was spent dealing with dream objects. Here's the Australian Aboriginal myth of walkabout. When the earth was newborn, it was plain and without any features or life. Waking time and sleeping time were the same, There were only hollows on the surface of the earth which, one day, would become waterholes. Around the waterholes were the ingredients of life. Underneath the crust of the earth were the stars and the sky, the sun and the moon, as well as all the forms of life, all sleeping. The tiniest details of life were present, yet dormant. The head feathers of a cockatoo, the thump of a kangaroo's tail, the gleam of an insect's wing. A time came when time itself split apart, and sleeping time separated from waking time. This moment was called the dream time. At this moment, everything started to burst into life. The sun rose through the surface of the earth and shone warm rays onto the hollows which became waterholes. Under each waterhole lay an ancestor, an ancient man or woman who had been asleep through the ages. The sun filled the bodies of each ancestor with light and life, and the ancestors began to give birth to children. Their children were all the living things of the world, from the tiniest grub wriggling on a eucalyptus leaf to the broadest eagle soaring in the blue sky. Rising from the waterholes, the ancestors stood up with mud falling from their bodies. As the mud slipped away, the sun opened their eyelids, and they saw the creatures they had made from their own bodies. Each ancestor gazed at his creation in pride and wonderment. Each ancestor sang out with joy, "I am." One ancestor sang, "I am kangaroo." Another sang, "I am cockatoo." The next sang, "I am honey ant." And the next sang, "I am lizard." As they sang, naming their own creations, they began to walk. Their footsteps and their music became one, calling all living things into being and weaving them into life with song. The ancestors sang their way all around the world. They sang the rivers to the valleys and the sand into dunes, the trees into leaf and the mountains to rise above the plain. As they walked, they left a trail of music. Then they were exhausted. They had shown all living things how to live, and they returned into the earth itself to sleep. And in honor of their ancestors, the Aborigines still go walkabout, retracing the steps and singing the songs that tell the story of life. The myth of Orpheus and Eurydice was, as we saw, a speech-thought story. So was the creation myth of the Aborigines. Stories derived from speech-thought, transmitted orally, deeply affect the unconscious of the listener. They resonate because we share symbols of love, of loss, music, the earth, the sun, the sky. No one really knows why humans the world over react to symbols in such deep ways. One theory, proposed by the psychoanalyst Carl Jung in 1934, was that humans share an unconscious structure which he called the collective unconscious. Within this unconscious structure, there lie archetypal symbols. The self, the shadow, the anima, the animus, the divine couple, the child, the hero, the great mother, the wise old man. These archetypal symbols can be activated, positively or negatively, during a person's life, creating either sources of emotional strength or self-limiting complexes. Jung's concept of a collective unconscious was widely criticized. But the idea of a collective unconscious is re-emerging in the 21st century. While print culture moved us away from our mouths into our eyes, away from our hearts and into our heads, electronic culture is moving us to a new immersive experience. Within the web community, there's a desire to share and intermingle thoughts, feelings, and projects. An internet project called Web 2 consciously aims to create and distribute new content through open communication, decentralization of authority, freedom to share and reuse, and a rethinking of the market as a conversation, a global invitation to share collective meaning. In the electronic age, we swim in a sea of images, of pleasure, of success, of fear, of identity. People choose symbols of personal meaning from this sea and live in more and more isolated pools of symbols. These symbol pools are little modern myth clusters. There's a large myth pool shared by millions of North Americans who watch television regularly and who allow its symbols to penetrate into their unconscious. These people will live their lives through a very particular modern myth of success, power, sexuality, and identity, as shaped by corporate marketing. There's another large myth pool shared by millions of North Americans who watch television selectively, who surf the internet, play video games, and engage in blogging. These people will live their lives through another very particular modern myth of success, power, sexuality, and identity, as shaped by interactive online experience. Then there is this myth pool, and this myth pool, and other isolated myth pools of business, ecology, therapy, and so on. These pools of unconscious meaning have some overlap, but the core symbols are mutually exclusive, making dialogue difficult and shared experience unlikely. This is why people in one symbol pool are unable to alter the behavior of people in another symbol pool, and politics has become the effort to impose one symbol pool's mythic meaning onto an entire country. Recently, a blogger at a very political website wrote, "I've come to the conclusion that neither side wants an understanding on a more meaningful level, that all the differing dialogue is really more about feeding an empty space than informing, exposing, or affecting the change they claim it is. Common enemies are necessary for each side to stubbornly stick to their position and further the divide among us. Political points of view are insignificant in comparison to who we are as humans." For now we see through a glass, darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know, even as also I am known. Buddhist meditation sometimes used mandalas to focus and open the mind. The Hindu mantra, a chanted syllable, is a Sanskrit word of man, meaning mind, and tra, meaning tool, a mind tool. Visual and auditory symbols have the power to bypass our conscious minds and enter our unconscious, where they can be used for raising spiritual consciousness or for implanting mythic symbols. People wear logos, hum jingles, tattoo their bodies with symbols of status, meaning, and power. The need for mythic superheroes persists, and mythic figures from Superman to Cerberus appear in all electronic media. Our psyches are fertile grounds for gardens of symbols. Symbolic seeds we plant there will grow, whether they're exotic perennials or simply weeds. And we all have weeds in our gardens. How can we tell if what we've planted is healthy? How can we know what blooms will spring from what seeds? What fruits will nourish the soul? The mystery of the soul's real needs is captured in another strange myth, the myth of Cupid and Psyche. Psyche was a woman whose great beauty aroused the jealousy of the love goddess Aphrodite. Aphrodite commanded her divine son, Cupid, to shoot an arrow into Psyche that would cause her to fall in love with only the ugliest of creatures. As time went on, and Psyche refused the attentions of all handsome suitors, the west wind Zephyrus carried her away to a palace where she would be seduced by her monstrous destiny. That night, when darkness fell, she was visited by someone she couldn't see, and the marriage was consummated. The strange lover returned night after night, insisting that Psyche not look at him. Psyche heard his gentle whispers and felt his tender touch, and soon fell in love with him. One night, determined to see her mysterious lover, Psyche took a lamp and a dagger to bed with her. When her lover returned, Psyche held up the lamp and readied the dagger to strike should he be a monster. But when she saw the beautiful face of Cupid, she was startled and spilled a drop of hot oil on him. Cupid rose up in pain and fled the palace, leaving Psyche alone. Psyche is soul, and Cupid is Eros. Eros is sensuality, creativity, relatedness. The curse Aphrodite laid on the soul was to fail to love beauty. When Eros seduced the soul in darkness, the soul felt the potential for love, yet feared the promised monstrous consequences. The soul wanted to see Eros, the way Orpheus wanted to see Eurydice, and so Eros fled the soul. Psyche was now filled with grief. In despair, she went to Aphrodite for help in getting Cupid back. Still vengeful, Aphrodite assigned Psyche 4 impossible tasks. The first task was to separate all the grains mixed up in a huge basket before nightfall. An ant took pity on Psyche, and with the help of his ant colony, achieved the task by nightfall. Next, Psyche had to take some wool from golden sheep grazing in a meadow. As she approached, a river reed warned her that the sheep were vicious and would kill her unless she waited until noon, when they would lie down to sleep. Psyche was then able to take wool that was caught on branches of trees. Psyche's third mission was to fetch water from an unreachable cleft in the rocks where the river Styx flowed. The place was guarded by serpents. This time, an eagle helped Psyche by bringing some water to her. Finally, Aphrodite commanded Psyche to enter Hades and fetch a box for her containing a magical beauty potion. Psyche climbed a high tower to kill herself in order to enter Hades, but the tower explained how to lull Charon and Cerberus, and how to stay alive by not eating anything there, and how to return. So Psyche found the box in Hades, ate nothing, and emerged safely from the underworld. But then she decided to open the box and take some of the beauty potion for herself to lure Cupid back. Instead, Psyche fell into a deep sleep. Having lost love, relatedness, and creativity, the soul was in despair. Its mission now was to rely on perception, cleverness, courage, determination, the 4 tasks, each accomplished by some split-off part of the soul's nature. This is how we survive when Eros is lost to us. Without love, we are clever, calculating, cold, and distant, but we survive. Cupid, meanwhile, had forgiven Psyche for burning him and was searching for her. When he found her asleep, he wiped the sleep from her face and took her to heaven, where he asked the gods to let them marry. The gods made Psyche immortal, blessed the marriage, and Psyche and Cupid had a daughter, whom they named Voluptas, pleasure. Without soul, Eros is meaningless sensual energy. Without Eros, soul is cold and detached. The union of soul and Eros can serve as our guides, as we sort out the seeds in our personal gardens, as we lust after gold, as we seek forbidden waters, as we search for buried treasures. Whether we're in therapy or in art, in business or in politics, there's someone in bed with us. A hidden lover we may think is fearsome, dangerous, a threat to our existence. Perhaps, though, we can look at our personal monsters and discover they're calling us to love.